Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Random Trek. I am Captain Christopher Ingle, and today I am reporting to you from sickbay, because even in the 23rd century, we can still get COVID. But that does not stop us from talking about what is argued as one of the best films in the Star Trek canon, if not the best, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And as always, I am joined by the man who keeps things running, the man who's on the bridge while I'm in sickbay, the man who clearly has never taken a transporter because he always insists on taking the stupid shuttles, Brennan, the Mystical Mar. Brennan, how you doing?
Reporting for duty, Captain Sir, even though you're sick.
He should be reporting for duty, but I figured since I'm feeling a little under the weather, we need another expert. We need someone else to join us. And for this, I've chosen a man who I've come to respect in the sci-fi world. This is a man who knows a lot about Star Trek, a lot about Star Wars, a lot about science fiction and nerddom in general. I'm talking, of course, about don't let his name fool you, Commander Chris Skywalker Dohmen. Dohmen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, very well. Thank you so much for inviting me on, Ingle, to talk about a movie that you and I have gone 20 rounds on and will continue to go 20 rounds on as the future progresses. But any chance that I have to come on and just nerd out about not just one of my favorite films, but I'll argue one of the best sci-fi films ever made.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, as always, when we have a guest on our show, Dohmen, why don't you just give us a small idea of where did your love of Trek come from in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, I grew up in a household that loves both Star Trek and Star Wars. I watched the original Star Wars trilogy with my dad on VHS, and we bonded over that. But, on TV late at night, we would watch reruns of Star Trek, the original series, and the Next Generation. And then we would watch, sort of the reruns of Deep Space Nine, though that one I didn't really do a deep dive on until actually just last year. I grew up watching Voyager and Enterprise with him. And that was, again, another thing we sort of bonded over was our love of, those two franchises. And yeah, and that ever ongoing war, I'm always the one in the middle because, these are both my franchises. And I always credit it that Star Wars taught me how to have an imagination. Star Trek taught me how to live my life.
That is absolutely great, because one of the things we recognized in the past is that Star Trek is all about hope and optimism. And even with new Trek and, they're giving a little more gritty, a little realistic edge, I think that sense of hope and optimism is still there. So that's really great to hear. And he's shaking his finger at me, folks, because we also disagree on some new Trek on this. But we'll get to more new Trek in the future. But to start it off, let's talk a little bit about this plot. And we're going to keep this very simple because we talked about Space Seed a few weeks ago. So if you've listened, please, if you have not listened to that episode, go over, pause this, listen to our episode about Space Seed, learn a little more about Khan, and then come back. I'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, you're back. You've watched it, now you know. This is the continuation, of course, of the Enterprise, but now the Enterprise is no longer on its 5-year mission or all about exploration. The Enterprise has now been relegated to a training vessel under the command of Captain Spock. And we open up with the infamous Kobayashi Maru being helmed by Lieutenant Savick, played by Kirstie Alley, in one of her, I'm not sure if it's her feature film debut, but pretty close to it.
And this is pre-Cheers.
It is pre-Cheers, yes. But she fails, as, hint, everybody does, except one person, failed the Kobayashi Maru, and she's really kind of driven by it, doesn't understand what she did wrong, and wants to get it right. Meanwhile, they're being watched by Kirk, who is an admiral in charge of kind of this cadet program as well. And he's going to go up to the Enterprise for an inspection. They're going to do an inspection cruise of the Enterprise, and they go out. But on the other side of the galaxy, we have the USS Reliant, helmed by the amazing Captain Terrell, played by Paul Winfield, and his first officer, Pavel Chekhov, because my boy Pavel got a promotion. I love seeing Pavel Chekhov finally get his due. But they're exploring SETI Alpha, what they believe is SETI Alpha 6. And again, if you listen to ours, you know exactly where they really are. It turns out that they're actually at SETI Alpha 5, and that due to an explosion of SETI Alpha 6, it caused damage to SETI Alpha 5, irreparable. And Khan and his people are there, and they discover this. Chekhov, realizing immediately what happened, tries to get out, but Khan catches them. Wants to know why they're there, and they put the little alien slugs in their head and control their brains, finding out about the Genesis project. And using Chekhov and Terrell, they hijack the USS Reliant to not only steal the Genesis as a weapon, but also to finally get revenge on the man who left him there, Captain James T. Kirk.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yes. And so the Enterprise, of course, as trope dictates, is the only ship in the quadrant that could possibly go, is sent to Regula 1, the space station where it's being built, and discovers that most of the crew have been killed. Some did escape through a transporter, but they come across the Reliant. Not understanding what's going on, Reliant doesn't answer. It fires at them and does some pretty significant damage. And this is where Kirk and Khan come face to face, quote, quote, face to face. Unfortunately, in this movie, they never actually face, which is a negative for me, but we'll get into that. But they managed to escape to Regula 1, pretending that the ship is damaged because they know that Khan may be listening in. They go down to the planet in this hidden cave and discover Dr. Marcus, Carol Marcus, and of course her son, David Marcus, who is also Kirk's son, we discover in the film. But because Terrell and Chekhov are under control of Khan, they end up transporting the Genesis device, leaving Kirk and Savick, Bones, and Dr. Marcus, the doctors Marcus's, trapped. However, Kirk had a plan. Buried alive. But they had a plan. And Spock manages just to swing the Enterprise around, beam them up, and they're going to face the Reliant one more time, but this time with a plan. They head into the Mutara Nebula, which will basically disable sensors and shields, leaving them defenseless, but also leaving the Reliant defenseless. And we begin what is possibly one of the best tit-for-tat kind of fights in Star Trek history, ship to ship, right up there with Space Seed, in my opinion. But of course, the Enterprise ends up getting the better of Khan and manages to disable the ship, telling Khan, surrender, we will show you mercy. And he doesn't. Khan wants to go down with the wrath that this movie is named for, and he activates the Genesis device. But there is significant damage to the Enterprise, and they can't warp away. And if they don't, the Genesis wave will destroy them. Spock goes down to engineering and discovers that there is a radiation leak, and they have to repair it. And if they can repair it, warp power can be restored. But anyone that goes in there is going to be killed. And he starts to want to go in there, but Bones stops him, says, no, you're going to die, man. There's got to be another way. He nerve pinches Bones and does something to his face. He says something, gives him almost like a melding of some kind that will never come up in any future films at all. And he goes in and he saves the Enterprise, dying in the process. Yeah, it's pretty brutal.
That's
and Kirk goes down. And we get the infamous, you have been and you always will be my friend. and Spock dies, and we end the end it with
Mm-hmm.
the funeral of Spock being launched onto the new Genesis planet, the regular one, basically the planet that's being we were at earlier. And we end the film seeing Spock's casket, torpedo casket, on the planet, and that ends the film.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's pretty heart-wrenching, and you got to compress it for just a synopsis into all one little bit. But let's talk, each of us, about something that we like in the film. Dohmen, you're our guest. Why don't you kick us off?
Overall thoughts.
Yeah.
Get your overall thoughts first, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll start with just, the fact that Nicholas Meyer, who came into this franchise, quick little behind the scenes thing, not really being that big of a Star Trek fan. He wasn't that big into the franchise. And this was also the franchise debut of longtime producer Harv Bennett, who would handle like the next 4 films. But this was, a new direction for Star Trek on the big screen as a whole. And that's probably why this is my personal favorite Star Trek film, because it takes everything that could have worked about the motion picture and enhances it. And then it cuts away everything that, in my opinion, dragged the movie down. It kept the story much more simple, but it was much more emotionally effective. They unfortunately did away with Jerry Goldsmith's score. However, they made up for it with an impeccable score by James Horner. Between the main
Rest in peace, the great James
Rest in
Horner.
peace to the great James Horner. And the fact that while just about every character gets a moment to shine in this film, this is obviously a Kirk story. And this is Kirk finally coming to terms with mortality. And it's funny because earlier today, I actually rewatched the scene from the 2009 Star Trek with the Kobayashi Maru. And I was kind of amazed at how that scene plays out, especially in the context of The Wrath of Khan. Because, and how honestly, it still works either way. It doesn't matter which timeline. The scene works perfectly because it's a James Kirk who never had to face mortality at that point. So it makes sense that, Kirk would be kind of, that anxious cowboy who wants to go out on one last big adventure. When adventure comes a calling, he takes it. And it costs him his best friend. And my God, like, I know that we love to, we as a fandom love to rag on Shatner a little bit for his acting. I can't do that for this film.
No.
For this film, especially,
No.
He is pitch perfect. Everyone is pitch perfect.
I agree.
Absolutely. Brennan, what are your personal thoughts on this, and maybe something that you really liked about this one?
I mean, to piggyback off of what Dohmen was saying, the acting is impeccable in this movie. And that's saying something for Star Trek. Because Star Trek, throughout the years, has had its history of a little bit of cheese here and there. But nothing wrong with a little cheese, I say. Unless you're allergic, which is my case. But, one of the things I think is interesting about this movie is it's about getting old. It's about aging. It's about youth. It's about that Kirk has reached a point in his life. In fact, I think all captains probably reach this where they realize they're not putting new kid on the block anymore. They've gotten old. And, what's interesting is one of the greatest scenes, I think, in this movie is Kirk's birthday party, quote unquote. Where he and Bones are talking and they're having Romulan ale. And they're just talking about, McCoy's like, you're afraid of turning into one of these antiques. And Kirk goes out, and I had never considered until Dohmen brings it up. brought it up just a minute ago that Kirk so much wants to go out there and be the space cowboy that his hubris costs him his best friend. That is profound insight. So I think, but overall, this is my favorite Star Trek film. This is one of my favorite sci-fi films. I think, without question, Ricardo Montalban is Khan. It's the greatest Star Trek villain, if not the greatest, one of the great sci-fi villains. Now, Star Trek has a history of great villains. Ricardo Montalban is so astonishingly brilliant, and it was so amazing that 15 years after the original series episode, they brought him back. And even though they never share any screen time together, the tension between them you can feel. Not to get too carried away, but I'll put it this way. This movie makes me think of The Hunt for Red October, or Master and Commander of the Far Side of the World. These great naval films. And particularly, it feels like a submarine film once you get into the nebula.
Right.
Yes.
But including with James Horner's great rollicking score, I mean, you feel like you're watching a big, like, Napoleonic era adventure Navy film. And that, I think, is the package is incredible. And I think to put it in a nutshell, this film has everything I could want in a Star Trek movie. And it does it all with aplomb. So those are my thoughts on it overall.
Yeah, I do, despite the precursor that Dohmen and I discuss this all the time, we're splitting hairs here because I acknowledge that Star Trek II is an amazing film. I personally don't feel it is the best, but I am a little biased to my favorite, which we'll get to down the line. We will. But there are a lot of similar themes which I find interesting between them. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to take us all to the library and we pull a couple of novels that Khan himself was looking at. And really talk heavily into, because it's only for a second that you see these books, but these books speak so much to the character of Khan and the themes that this movie presents.
Yes.
The obvious one is Milton's Paradise Lost,
which I just read last year. I was telling us before we recorded.
Nice.
Paradise Lost, for those who don't know, it was written in the 17th century by John Milton. It's considered his masterpiece. It discusses the fall of man, as well as the temptation of Adam and Eve by Satan. So automatically, when we say the fall of man, we can really see with Khan the depths that he's willing to go for revenge. And in the book, or in the book, Paradise Lost, when we have Lucifer, who's been expelled from heaven, and the Bible tells us one of God's most beautiful angels.
How thou art fallen, O Lucifer, son of the morning.
Right. He's expelled. He wants revenge. He wants revenge on mankind, which he feels God has put above himself.
And if he can corrupt man, he can thumb his nose at God.
And what's interesting here is that Khan does this. Khan, though forcefully, corrupts Tyrell and Chekhov. And there's a price to be paid because of that corruption. Because of Chekhov and Tyrell, we end up with the death of Spock in the end. Now, you could go even further back and say, well, the Federation should have checked up on them. The Federation, all that is accurate. They coulda, shoulda, woulda. The point is that they didn't. And by them going down to that planet, it sets in effect these events that cause the descent of man. And if Khan is Satan, it really makes me kind of put into question, are we turning Kirk into this godlike figure. And by that extension is Spock Jesus.
Mm.
The idea of sacrificing of the one for the many. That's exactly what the Bible says. And the King James version of the Bible is there on his shelf, which, when you look at, a lot of these stories are very Old Testament heavy.
Yeah.
It's all about fire, brimstone, retribution, eye for an eye kind of thing. The Old Testament was very heavy about that.
Mm-hmm.
Very heavy about that. So I have a feeling, first of all, that Khan was not a reader of the New Testament.
No.
He was a reader of the Old Testament. Because his actions and what's also on his shelf really kind of justify that. And then if you're reading this kind of a book, wouldn't you want reference material, things to continue to read into it? And it justifies. He's choice reading what he wants, but it's not the only book on his list.
Mm-hmm.
Dante's Inferno,
which I've also read.
Dante's Inferno is even older. It's a 14th century poem by Dante Alighieri, part of the Divine Comedy, which is a trilogy. Here's what's interesting. Only Dante's Inferno is on the shelf and not the other two pieces to the puzzle, Purgatory, and Paradiso, heaven. Dante's comedy is literally a descent into hell, a climb through purgatory, and then a climb to the reaches of heaven. It also is about the fall and ascent of man. But when you only read Dante's Inferno, all you see is the descent and the darkness and the pain and what is inevitable, fueling what Khan is feeling in this.
Interesting.
Well, especially when you take into consideration just how driven he is considering how driven by very simple emotions he is in this particular film. Like, obviously in Space Seed, Khan was a little bit more fleshed out. He was a little bit more complex, but that's because this was a new era for him. He didn't know what his crew was going to be going through when they woke up. Sorry to tangent off into Space Seed, but I'm going to bring it back here now. Now that he has survived those events, and now that he's gone through the ordeal with Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise, his life is now in a completely different place because of the implosion of Ceti Alpha 6 and the death of his wife.
He was plunged into hell.
Exactly. Now he's in hell, and he doesn't want to get out. He doesn't want to make himself better. He just wants to bring Kirk down with him. Yeah. That is his sole motivation.
Which leads us to the next novel, and possibly the most blatant reference in it, and that's Moby Dick.
Yes.
Khan is Ahab. Plain and simple, Khan is Ahab, and he is willing.
This novel has appeared in Star Trek multiple times.
Oh yes, I mean we'll get to that in how Picard becomes Ahab, and very similar themes in there.
Yeah.
But it's very simple. In fact, he quotes Melville a lot in this. At hell's hard, I stab at thee. The idea
For
of
hate's
that.
sake, I spit my last breath at thee.
Exactly. And even Picard down the line in First Contact expanded on that if his chest had been a cannon, he would have spat his heart upon it. Like, wanting to bring Kirk down is all he's living for. And that's it. Everyone else be damned. And we see this.
And that's Captain Ahab.
Joaquin, his second in command, tells him, you have Genesis. You have the Reliant. Kirk is on the ropes. What are you doing? Let's leave.
He tasks me, and I shall have him.
He isn't done until he feels truly avenged. And I don't even think it's for marooning him. I think it's for the death of his wife. I really don't.
Death of one of the MacGyvers. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the death of his wife is what really sets that again. But it is not the only book. There's one more book in this, but it's not Khan's book. It's Kirk's book.
Oh, yeah.
Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens.
Which I just finished reading about 4 months ago.
Nice. I actually, I still vividly remember reading that in 10th grade back in high school, and I've gone back to it a couple of times since then, and it's always stuck with me.
And I cried like a baby at the end of that book.
You're talking
get to the It is a far better thing than I do than I've ever done.
Right. You're
Yeah.
talking a book that is about two cities, two countries during the French Revolution that were really at one point allies, friends, and they end up becoming adversaries. The French Revolution caused so many problems historically
Oh, my word, yes.
in Europe and throughout the world. And so this one is very interesting too. It really sets to ask what side Kirk is on and what is he willing to do? What is he able to do? Is he going to sit in like the city of London and the old ways and be under the torment of, in his mind, his age? Or is he going to embrace revolution and feel young again and feel reborn?
Also, Khan could be like France. If you study the history of the French Revolution, they were willing to do anything to destroy the old way.
Well, especially if you're studied up on French Revolution history. I mean, one way to look at it, I see it, is look at Khan as like Robespierre.
Good point.
He's, he's the one who is just calling for the heads to roll. And if we're going and to use the allegory of Tale of the Two Cities, we have our Charles Darnay, we have James Tiberius Kirk, but we also have Sidney Carton, aka Spock,
who is the real hero of that story,
who is the true hero of that story, and winds up being the true hero of this story, who knows that he shouldn't give his life because it will make everyone around him upset. Sidney Carton shouldn't give his life for Charles Darnay because it will upset Lucy. But he does so because he loves her. And Spock gives his life willingly because he loves Jim.
There's a really interesting arc with Kirk in this that I didn't actually think of until now. His last thing Kirk says in this is I feel young.
Feel young.
I feel young.
There it is.
In Star Trek 6, which of course we'll get to, there is this idea of we're getting old. Are we outdated? Are we what happens?
We become so old to outlive our usefulness.
Right. The last thing that he says, again, quoting literature, and again, we're going to talk literature when we get to Star Trek 6, because it continues.
Oh yeah.
But he quotes J.M. Barrie and Peter Pan, Second Star to the Right, Straight On Till Morning, Neverland, Eternal Youth. It's this arc for Kirk realizing that it's not over.
Can I make one little note? So you mentioned the Bible, and Khan seems to have a love of the Old Testament. Well, in the Tale of Two Cities, Sidney Carton frequently quotes the passage where Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live." If Khan's not a big fan of the Old Testament, clearly Spock is in a metaphorical sense. Because what does Spock do? Gives his life, as Jesus did, to become that resurrection and the life.
From a certain point of view.
Yes, which is something that Khan would never have done. In fact, his first mate Joachim is dying. What did Joachim say? Yours is superior. Khan said, "I will avenge you." Khan would not be willing to lay down his life for anyone. But you could argue that Spock, like Mr. Carton, quoting that passage in the Bible, is someone who would lay down his life for somebody else. And again, there's another biblical connection in there.
Yeah. This movie carries a lot of heavy biblical connection, and the books that are connected to it, of course, are heavily inspired and taken from the stories of the Bible.
Yep.
Dante, Milton, we're heavy into looking at Old Testament. Melville, absolutely. So that doesn't surprise me at all. And I'll tell you, as an English teacher, this movie brings me a lot of joy. The analysis, we could probably sit here for hours breaking down the books and comparing it to things that happen in this film.
Yeah.
No question asked.
And Star Trek is nothing if not a literary franchise.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are definitely a few other things that I love in here that are beyond story. Again, as in the first film, the special effects, despite having a budget that was severely slashed, shoestring budget, that Matara Nebula is gorgeous.
That's like a fight in a submarine movie.
It's built that way, exactly. It's very much like Balance of Terror.
You can't see your enemy,
but it does such a good job in there of bringing back things from Spacey. Spock reminds Kirk that Khan is only capable of two-dimensional thinking, which gives Kirk the idea to go underneath the Reliant.
And if you remember the very first episode of Star Trek: The Original Series, at least not the cage, was Where No Man Has Gone Before. And how does that episode begin? Kirk playing three-dimensional chess with Spock.
Yep.
There it is.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Kirk is by far the more observant, better leader. He is.
Kirk's the observer.
He is calm. He is prepared. He also is unwilling to lose. That in lies, though, Kirk's fatal flaw as well as his strength. So let's, because it's something that I think we can all agree we like. Let's talk about Kirk and his incessant need to win. And the Kobayashi Maru. Let's talk about this. Dohmen, I'll give you the pleasure. Remind our audiences, what was Kirk's brilliant solution to the no-win scenario?
He reset the parameters so that way he could win. He cheated. Which, that's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant that he managed to pull that off. But that's a big no-no because it completely misses the point of the lesson of the Kobayashi Maru. Completely misses it.
And yet he received a Medal of Commendation for a test for creative thinking. Genius. But that's the interesting thing about him. Kirk's drive to refuse to accept death costs him dearly. He could have left at any point, left Khan alone too. He could have moved on, but no, he too engaged. His quest to not lose cost him the life of Spock. Spock had to do what was needed to save everybody. But his drive. Now, there was one more book on that shelf.
Oh.
Shakespeare's King Lear.
There we go. There it is.
Yes. Now, it's interesting how both Khan and Kirk both are exactly like King Lear. Both of them. Exactly. And it's amazing. Well, I think what makes adversaries so good against each other when you truly have those rivalries that just stand the test of time, which Kirk and Khan do, is when you're not when they're complete opposites, but when they're exactly alike. Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes. I mean, when they are on equal ground, that is when the fight is at its most fierce. And they are so much like King Lear. And King Lear, King Lear wanted to split up his power and his land in his old age to his two daughters. But in the result, or his three daughters, I'm sorry. But I ended up only going to do two. Anyway.
I know what you mean.
In the process, he becomes poor, he becomes crazy, and it's kind of the crux of a lot of political meanderings and things like that. He becomes the tool to result in people wanting to take advantage of that. So it's really interesting here that both Khan and Kirk kind of fit that in their unwillingness to let it go, in their unwillingness to let their legacies die, their unwillingness to quit. That we end up with the death of two major characters. Khan ends up killing himself. Well, in the end, he kills himself. And Spock, Kirk loses Spock. He doesn't lose himself, but someone that is deeply connected to him and part of him.
Part of himself, yeah.
Yeah.
The layers of this movie are magnificent. The more layers you can peel back, and it's all there, and it's all packaged so well, I think.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. See, I start to talk about how beautiful the film looks, and it goes back to literature still. I love it.
Yep. It all
Well,
goes
that's
there.
the thing, though. Like, Wrath of Khan is the thinking man's blockbuster.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that without an ounce of, putting down anyone else, I say without an ounce of snobbery. It's just a movie that was where Jack B. Sowards and Harv Bennett, who share the story and screenplay credits for this film, basically wanted to, in a sense, kind of show off how smart they are, but also wanted to, use a rule that I've been starting to notice in a lot of popular media, where it's not really a rule. It's just a saying that I've been coming across lately, where the whole concept of a good artist borrows, a great artist steals. And here they stole from so much great literature to craft
I like that quote.
a wonderful story.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. This is amazing.
And we could go on for hours and hours. So great.
Yeah, the Jerry Goldsmith score is absolutely perfect.
James Horner.
I said James. Sorry.
James Horner.
Flip it. Yeah. Both of them, I argue, it's sometimes
James
it's hard to
gives
notice.
it this great naval score.
Yes.
But
it pulls at your heartstrings. It knows when to the play out as we go and we hear Spock ending it with space final, which, by the way, you want to get me really excited at the end of the film and feel like I won. Give me space, the final frontier. Nostalgia waves just flow.
Mm-hmm.
Just flow.
And the way he whispers it.
Yes, space, the final. See, it works because my voice is terrible right now. I can almost get
there.
There
you
go. But it's great. Now for the challenging test, gentlemen. What didn't you like? I will start this.
Yeah, please start.
This is where the argument goes between me and Dohmen.
Oh.
I acknowledge Khan is a great villain. I don't feel he is the best Star Trek villain.
Well, that's not necessarily a criticism.
It is to me, and I'll tell you why. And I've felt this way for years, okay? I feel what they did with Khan was really, really good. What they did was of no minor achievement. But the idea of using Khan today would get just pushed to fan service. Why did you choose that villain? Why not Harry Mudd? Why not the Klingons? Why not a Romulan? Why, there are so many other villains that Kirk has faced, because let's face it, up until the movies, so just the original series, the only person that Kirk ever faced multiple times was Harry Mudd.
Yeah, twice.
Everyone else, one time. So why Khan? Why that story? Why that? And it feels as much like they went back and looked like, well, what's rated as one of the most loved episodes? Hey, I wonder what happened to this guy. And I will say, Spock does leave it open, going, when we go back, what will we reap from this?
Yeah, what seed will have been planted? Yeah.
Which again, that was also Paradise Lost, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah,
I think so.
Connection to Paradise Lost. But it feels like a bit of fan service, and I very much would have liked a direct conflict between Khan and Kirk. I still feel that your hero and your villain need to go face to face. They need to see eye to eye. Need to see each other down. Through a view screen or through a communicator, That doesn't work for me. Not enough. Now it builds tension in a different kind of way, but I need that classic buildup. And what's really interesting is the two films that I feel are above Star Trek 2. And again, it's very close. We're splitting hairs here. Our main characters face their adversaries head to head at least once on screen. And there's a back and forth. There's something to it. Kirk and Khan don't get that. And I feel we are robbed because of it. Even if in the slightest, again, splitting hairs. But I really feel they needed to have one thing together, because then the next time we get Kirk facing a villain, we get that stupid fight between Kirk and Krug on the Genesis planet, and it's terrible. Yeah, I'm going to say it. It was terrible. I hate that fight.
Well, it's a good thing that we're only discussing what we don't like.
Yeah, but my point is,
discussion.
I want to feel like it is earned. I want to feel like the victory is earned. And a head-to-head, face-to-face, eye-to-eye, just once, is all I would have asked, and we didn't get it.
Okay. For me, in terms of what I don't like, there isn't really a lot. There really isn't. This film, I think, is so good. I could quibble a little bit with the recycled footage from the motion picture at the beginning, but that's a minor little thing. And I certainly think that the characters really get a lot of screen time, so there isn't a problem there. Maybe, some of the minor characters like Uhura and Sulu and whatnot don't get a whole lot to do. As far as that's really, there really isn't anything I've got a major problem with in this movie. I think that it's great, it's fun, I think everything pretty much works, so I've got really nothing.
And for me, it just comes down to, if they were trying to tell that kind of story that would require Kirk and Khan to physically, in person, fight face to face, hand to hand, whatever it is, if this was that kind of story, I would agree with you, Ingle. I would agree. This isn't that kind of story, though. Because this is about Kirk trying to rediscover who he is as a person and being granted a new version of his life that Khan just happens to be basically the messenger boy of. Because what is this story really about? It's about a man who's unsure of where his life is going, who comes across an old flame and discovers he has a chance to actually reconnect with his son. That last moment with David is like one of the most touching moments in any Star Trek film for me, hands down.
And you look at what Kirk gains that Khan loses. Because Khan, and go with me on this, I'm going to compare Khan to Darth Maul in the Clone Wars and the Rebels animated series.
Sisyphus.
At the end, yes, there he is, Sisyphus. At the end of his life, Maul faces Obi-Wan. And we come to realize that Maul has lost everything because he has fought so long for vengeance that he has nothing left. Han is a similar villain to Darth Maul in that Han gains nothing. He has lost everything and been so fueled by hate that he can't see past that. And like as Dohmen says, the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was punished to carry, roll a rock up a hill, let it roll down, do it again, all eternity. That's what Khan is stuck in. And Kirk, on the other hand, gains lots of things.
Because Khan honestly could have had a chance to create SETI Alpha 5 into a more prosperous world. He
Yep.
could have done something good with his life. He could have settled down and made something of himself. But instead, he let circumstances keep him in this hateful place, and all he could turn to was revenge. It's literally, and because of that, he was doomed to keep repeating the same mistake over and over and over again until it cost his life.
Yeah, in fact, further with the Darth Maul allegory, comparison between Maul and Khan. When Maul fights Kenobi in the desert of Tatooine, he uses the exact same maneuver he used to kill Qui-Gon Jinn.
Yes.
He never learned. Similarly, Khan never learned where
Oh.
Kirk did. There we go.
And it's one of those things where I think Khan is labeled as the greatest just because he has had the most legacy. Because he had the
that's fair.
chance, because, and here's the thing. It could have been
Good
Gary
point.
Mitchell. It could have been Harry Mudd.
Yeah.
It could have been insert character from season 1 here. But
Or
it could have been the Gorn. It could have been. It could have been one
or
of
the Klingons.
It could have been freaking
Chara.
Chiralaine. That would have been
Yeah.
amazing.
Oh, there we go.
But they went with Khan, and that's just how things played out. So, like, the way that I see it, like, I 100% hear you, Ingle. You are valid in your feelings, but of course, my friend, I have to very respectfully disagree with you, because when I'm looking for just an absolute perfect interpretation of what I think a great Star Trek villain is, that's my guy. Is he the greatest? There's an argument. But if you were to say, no, I think General Chang, or no, I think the Borg Queen, or no, I think Q, you've got an argument. I'm not going to disparage you. So.
Yep. All right.
All right. Well, we move on to probably the bigger debatable question. What effect does this have on Star Trek as a whole? What does this movie do for us besides open up gates for discussion like this?
Well, certainly right off the bat, this sets up the next 2 films.
Right.
Yep. Sets up the Genesis trilogy.
And The Undiscovered Country also carries elements of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get that on a micro level. On a macro level, of course, this does lead to Star Trek Into Darkness, which we could have a whole discussion about.
Oh boy.
We will at some point.
But we're not going to go there right now. But also, I think it leads to, since this movie, a lot of people have been trying to think of how can we create the next Khan in Star Trek, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Exactly. Like that, and again, that's one of the legacies of Khan as a character in general, is that pretty much every Star Trek film villain since has been compared to him by proxy, whether it's intentional or not. In a lot of ways, actually, if you'll forgive me for making a video game reference,
Please.
Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is the Ocarina of Time of Star Trek films. Ocarina of Time is often regarded as one of the greatest Legend of Zelda games ever made.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, especially people our age and a little bit older, that game still holds up because it holds a very nostalgic place for them. It does for me as well. I still genuinely love Ocarina of Time.
It's a good game.
But do I acknowledge that, yeah, it's a little dated? Yeah. Is the story a little simple? Sure. Is Ganondorf in his best version in that game? No, of course not. But is it still great? Absolutely. And every Legend of Zelda game since, I would even argue up to Breath of the Wild, has been compared unfairly, I'd say, to Ocarina of Time, because Ocarina has just had time on its side, pardon the pun, to be nice to it. Of course, there are criticisms, but if it sticks with you, that means it did something right. And so with Wrath of Khan, it's kind of the same thing. That to me is the legacy of it.
And
every Star
it's
Trek film
its
since
40th anniversary this year.
Exactly. And because we are still celebrating on its 40th anniversary, that should speak volumes to the fact that it's held up as well as it had, unlike its predecessor and unlike its successor.
Also, within the story, the concept of the eugenics wars, the concept of the augments continues to this very day.
Hi,
In
Julian.
fact,
How's it going?
Star Trek Strange New World even dealt with some of that. So it continues.
No spoilers, though. I haven't seen
day.
it. I haven't seen that yet.
I would love
needless to say,
yeah.
it continues to this very day.
I would love to get into the eugenics wars and what have you, but I have to say, because of Picard, because of Strange New Worlds, even that is being rewritten today, and I am kind of bummed about that. But no consistency.
Well, Star Trek has never had much of the way of a canon. Let's be clear.
I thought we were good through the TNG era. Let me say, I thought we were getting really good at it. Anyway, for me, in terms of the greater legacy, I do think this is the first really good example of character development and character growth in Star Trek. Yes. True growth. And we get more of that over 3 films. We do, which is kind of nice. But I really like the idea that Star Trek finally realized, yeah, it's okay to make our characters grow. It's more than just an ensemble piece. We can give them unique traits and grow on them. We can give them flaws and grow on them.
Mm-hmm.
They still haven't given Uhura crap in the original series. Poor girl. But
True.
Yeah, there are a few characters who suffer. Even Chekhov getting a little more here was nice. Really nice.
True. It's true. It was kind of nice.
But for the most part, it gave, well,
it's Kirk Stock McCoy.
Well, to quote Kirk, of all the souls I have encountered, his was the most human.
And in fact, Spock is, I would argue, is maybe the greatest, not the greatest, but it's maybe the most important character in all of Star Trek. In a way.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
Because his presence continues to be felt even today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So yeah.
And now, and to quickly go back to your whole Uhura comment for just 2 seconds. Although it's funny you say that, because yeah, she doesn't really get too much to do in the film, but behind the scenes, I remember watching a retrospective on the Wrath of Khan. Seriously, and by the way, y'all, if you want a great watch on YouTube, go look up Rowan J. Coleman's Star Trek retrospective.
Yes,
he covers all the films.
I absolutely agree.
The series, he's
I absolutely
great.
agree. I recommend it.
Yes. A great point that he brought up was that Nichelle Nichols actually had a conversation with Harve Bennett and Nicholas Meyer, and basically kind of helped give them the idea to cut back on showing Star Trek's the Federation's militaristic view as a good thing, which was very controversial with Gene Roddenberry, which God love that woman for being such a boss.
Yeah. No, and she does eventually get more, and something the JJ verse does is to give her more presence, and I appreciate that. I really do.
As Zoe Saldana is great.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our favorite moments, but not only just favorite moments. I want to get from each of you your favorite moment in this film, but because it is so quotable, I also want your favorite quote out of this film.
Oh, okay.
You just want me to do an impression, don't you?
Easy for me.
What do you got,
favorite moment in this film is Kirk's birthday party with Bones. What a great scene that is. It's all dialogue. There's no action. They're just chatting, having some Romulan ale. The glasses get introduced, which oddly enough are broken by the end of the film. After Spock's death, oddly enough, a little comparison there. Now, my favorite quote is from Khan. Is I think at the end of his life, his final Captain Ahab quotes. For hate's sake, I spit my last breath at thee. It's interesting that he died with hate on his lips. That's telling. He lived his whole life hating, or at least the last 15 years hating Captain Kirk. And that's all he has left to give. So that's my favorite quote.
Absolutely.
What do you got, Dohmen?
Yeah, for me, oh God, so many great scenes. One of my favorite moments is actually probably one of the most sad moments, and I'm gonna actually reference the TV cut of this film that featured extended, the director's cut that featured extended sequences, including one where while Kirk is inspecting engineering, he comes across this very promising looking cadet.
Peter Preston, aka
Scotty's nephew.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know,
that scene.
Scotty is so proud to have his nephew serving on board the ship.
I know where you're going.
Fast forward to after Khan's attack, and Preston is dying in medical bay, and he dies basically in Scotty's arms after he grabs Kirk, and gets blood all over his uniform, which is so symbolic. I love it.
Yeah.
Is the word given, Admiral? The word is given. Warp speed. Oh
my word.
James Doohan sells the hell out of it.
Yes.
I am hurting in that moment.
In fact, when I rewatched the movie, if you watch really closely, and the emergency door is closing in engineering, you could see Peter Preston climbing in and helping people get out.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. That scene is devastating.
Yeah. He died a hero, but he was still dead.
Yeah.
And
Kirk paid the price for it.
Exactly. Now, for favorite quote, I mean, I got too many to choose from. So I'm just gonna do a bad Ricardo impression because I'm sorry. This line is fucking incredible and I love it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have done far worse than kill you. I've hurt
you.
And I wish to go on hurting you. I shall leave you as you left me, as you left her, marooned for all eternity in the center of a dead planet, buried alive. I'm sorry. I know it's a cliche, but I don't care. It's so good. Ingle, hit us.
Yeah, scene-wise...
Oh, you asked a question you didn't have an answer to, but then...
I've been thinking about this. Because you're right. There are a lot of...
Captain, sir, you surprised me.
It's the COVID. It's clouded my mind. I would, if I had to pick one, I would say... I would probably think the very ending, when Kirk is on the bridge, and they're looking at the formation of the Genesis planet. And Kirk says, it's a far, far better thing I do than I've ever done before. A far better resting place that I go to than I've ever known. And Marcus goes, is that a poem? And he's like, no. Something Spock was trying to tell me on my birthday. This is interesting. On my birthday. Now, we could take that literally as the day of his birth. But the events of this film are a rebirth for Kirk. He was trying to tell me something. And it's so profound for Kirk. Kirk is not known for his profoundness. He's right usually, but profound, not usually one of his traits.
Not usually, no.
This is such a good quote. And it's not even one that's quoted the most, but...
Does it count as our favorite quote that actually comes from a different author?
Hell yes, he said it. It counts.
All right.
What if I said it was the best of times? It was the worst.
There you go.
All right. Final thoughts.
Go ahead, Commander Dohmen.
It's one of my favorite films that I've had the pleasure of seeing dozens of times. I've seen it on the big screen. I've seen it on the small screen. Hell, while we were on call here, I actually looked up to see if it was playing anywhere near me, and it is actually playing the first week of August. So
there you go.
What?
So I
think I'm gonna go.
I was gonna say, being that we are at the anniversary, around anniversary of it, through August and September, depending on the theater that you're at, they will be showing showings of Wrath of Khan. And just like I said about Space Seed, this is required viewing.
Yes.
You need to see this film.
Yes, I agree.
It is beautiful. It is passionate. It is touching. It is moving. It is powerful. It is dramatic.
Don't be turned off by the fact that it's a Star Trek movie.
No.
This is a movie.
And literally, so actually,
and this is a movie.
Back in college, I used to work at a pizza shop, and a couple of my coworkers who were massive Star Wars fans, but genuinely did not like Star Trek, even they said this movie is incredible.
Yeah.
So that should speak to how great it is.
And this is also one of the great films of the 80s, one of the great sci-fi films of the 80s.
Absolutely.
A bright spot in a dark decade.
Then what a dark stuff, yeah.
Well,
no, I just meant this was a good movie in a bad decade.
That being said, next week we are moving backwards in time to the USS Discovery. We're going to season 2, episode 11, Perpetual Infinity. This is the one where Captain Pike is in charge of Discovery, and Pike discovers what his destiny is going to be using the time crystals. And that alone, though a small scene of it, sets off so much to come in the Star Trek universe.
You got it.
And we're going to talk about that next week. But, Dohmen, where can the people find you?
You guys can follow me on all social media platforms at Skywalker Dohmen. You guys can follow my band Last Shot at Last Shot MN.
Awesome.
Brennan?
Well, first off, let me just say a big thank you to the Commander, Chris Skywalker Dohmen, for joining us today. Thank you, Chris, so much. We have had such a blast talking with you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
You can find me on Twitter at Brennan Mystical. You can follow me with the Mark Riley, the Outland Nation, Video Drew, A Certain Point of View, Let's Get Ready, the Cinema Fanatics, the list goes on and on. Find me there and find me here. My Star Wars podcast, Page Turners They Were Not. And here on Random Trek in the Umbrella Network. Page Turners They Were Not.
Yes, and of course you can find me on Twitch and Twitter at Ingle1984, and you can also find me with Video Drew, Mark Riley, Ben Bateman, the Let's Get Ready Network, doing multiple schmo-related things, among other fun blasted things. And of course, again, for me, thank you, Dohmen, for coming in and talking about this great film. But as always, we end every episode, Kaplach, and live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.